Welcome to the Happiness Trap Podcast with the Counseling Center. My name is Cassie Haas. I'm a psychologist with the UToledo Counseling Center.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Reed. I'm a counselor trainee at the Counseling Center as well.
Before we get started, we just want to give a disclaimer that this podcast is not meant in any way to replace any mental health treatment that you might seek. It is just a way for us to connect with the students of the University of Toledo and talk about some healthy ways that we can cope during these difficult times.
Today, we're going to discuss chapters 1 through 3 of the Happiness Trap. And these chapters are a lot about the myths we tell ourselves about happiness, right? So I was wondering, Cassie, what your reactions to these happiness myths have been.
Yeah, so I love that he started with talking about the myths about happiness because I think these are things that we are told all the time, every day of our life, from the time we're small children all the way through adulthood. This myth that happiness is this natural state that we're all just supposed to be in. And that's just not true. I tell people all the time, you know, when we ask each other, oh, how are you doing? How are things going? And a lot of times we'll say, things are just fine, right? And we take that as, oh, they're just lying about something. Oh, they don't want to talk about something. But a lot of times we are just fine. And I think that really speaks to where we typically try to find an equilibrium of our emotions. A lot of times we just kind of feel neutral, as people might describe it. And that often gets overshadowed, though, by this need to, but I have to feel happy. I should be feeling happy. I should be feeling all of these good emotions, when in all reality, it's not realistic.
Agree with that. One that really stuck out to me is myth number 4. You should be able to control what you think and feel. I think that this is something that we also inherit from when we're really young, that we are able to, manipulate and control these thoughts and feelings that we do have. And the reality of the situation is that we can really only control our behavior, that these emotions, these thoughts can just pop up. But it's how we choose to behave that is important. And that's where we're going to go with this book, right? That our behaviors are the things that we can control. But I think that myth number 4 is a myth that I have certainly bought into in my life. And if you can't control those things, then there's a lot of shame that's associated with it. And the reality of the situation is that we actually just can't control it.
Yeah, I really like that too. That leads nicely into what he talks about in chapter 2, how the solution becomes the problem, right? Our solution to feeling bad is to try to control it so we feel good. And he talks a little bit about how that comes from an evolutionary standpoint and how we deal with threats from the environment. You know, if you're in an environment that's threatening, if you see a snake on a trail when you're walking, you walk the other way, and it's easy to control that threat then, because you can just avoid it, right? But our emotions don't operate in the same way. But when we try to then put these same control strategies on them, we just find that we get ourselves in this really messy situation.
Right. And I like that you just highlighted control strategies, because that's another massive component to this section right now, right? Is what we do with control and how that becomes the problem. And I think that the section that said common control strategies, it starts on page 21. All of these were like, taking a window right to my heart. And I think it really speaks to us and our clients and a lot of the people that I know, right? Particularly things like distracting yourself from unwanted feelings and emotions, or arguing with them, instead of letting them be and allowing space for them. That, these control strategies actually deaden us to feeling And that's not what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to create an expansive environment for our feelings to operate in. And that these control strategies really get in the way of doing that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do like too that he highlighted that, you know, sometimes we're going to use control strategies and it's not bad in every situation. It's with moderation. It's using them not all the time in order to cope with everything, but sometimes if you know, you're in a heated argument with your partner, maybe you do just need to step away for a few minutes and
Mm-hmm.
recollect yourself. And that's okay. We're not saying that avoiding and distracting and all of these things are bad all of the time, but he makes a point to say it's bad when it gets us to the point where we're no longer doing what matters to us, or we're no
Mm-hmm.
longer able to cope. We're feeling bottled up and our emotions just feel out of control. That's when it starts to become a problem for us. And so I really like that he made that distinction, because the truth is we're all going to do it at some point. You know, I still find myself procrastinating a little bit when I have something to do, and maybe I'll get up and do the dishes instead. But as long as I get back to doing what I was supposed to do and still do what matters, you know, it's not that big of a deal.
Right. I really like what you just said about doing what matters. This is so common through the whole text of this book, is getting in the habit of asking ourselves the question, does this help me create a meaningful and rich life? Right? And so getting in that habit and saying, okay, like doing the dishes does help me create a rich and meaningful life because it's caring for my home, it's caring for my partner, it's caring for myself and the environment I live in, or you know what, whatever it is, right? And then just getting in that habit of asking yourself that question,
Hmm.
because sometimes I think that you know, there's nothing wrong with watching TV at night as a distraction if you've had a hard day, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's when it becomes chronic and you're refusing to engage with your emotions, that's when it becomes a problem. And
Hmm.
I think that Dr. Harris does a really good job throughout this whole book of saying, hey, if this isn't ring true to your life, trust your own experience, right? Your own experience is more valuable and has more to teach you than this book does. However, it does make us ask the vulnerable question, am I being honest with myself? And does this help me create a life I want to live?
Right. And I love that piece of this book where he wants you to use it, use his advice, use this advice, this backed up by research, uh, flexibly. He wants you to kind of not take his word for it because he's an expert in the field, but he wants you to implement it in your life and see, does it work for you? And if not, then try something else, right? Not everything is going to work for everyone, but it's just a matter of kind of trying new things if we're in a rut, you know. If we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to kind of ask yourself, what is important for me to change right now? And do I have the energy to do that? And is this the way I want to do it? And so I do like that he kind of approaches this in a flexible way.
Right. And that's going to be a huge theme throughout this book as well, right? Cognitive flexibility
Hmm.
and not holding on to things too tightly,
Yes.
being really adaptable to situations. And I think we're learning that right now during this time, right? Like being rigid right now is going to be really hard. And so we are learning how to be flexible in these moments as well. That has definitely been a major takeaway for me. And when we started reading this book, we could have never known that COVID-19 was coming, right? So this has been a really good reminder for me about flexibility during these moments as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think specifically for me too, just the idea of doing this podcast, I shared with you a little bit ago, I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
totally comfortable with. I don't necessarily like being recorded or hearing my own voice, but understanding that this is still something that we can provide that is hopefully going to benefit people. And so challenging myself to kind of sit with the discomfort of doing this,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that it does make me a little anxious, but doing it anyways because it is what matters.
Right. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I would say that I am not feeling 100% comfortable either. I've never done anything like this before. And my thoughts have immediately gone to what if people hate this? What if, you know, what if Kathy thinks that I don't have good things to say? Right. All of that stuff that comes up for us. But just knowing that I am willing to sit in this discomfort because one of my values is providing counseling, right?
Mhm.
And this has been a time that we have to be flexible in our understanding of what that means. And it's still really important for me to serve the students of UT and whoever else hears this in whatever ways we can, because that's a value to me, right? So we're practicing being uncomfortable to do something that matters. And it's hard to practice it.
It is. It is definitely. Um, but that leads really nicely into chapter 3. He talks about these core principles of ACT, right? And ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy. It's one of the third wave therapies in the psychology and counseling world right now, and it's pretty new, but it's up and coming. It has a lot of research behind it. But Leah, I'm just wondering, what do you like about ACT? What made you want to do this podcast with me in this book?
Oh, I like ACT a lot because I think it is both, um, for me at least, it is both spiritual and practical. Now, ACT, it doesn't have to be spiritual in any way. ACT is not a religion, and we want to be really clear about that. There's a whole section in this book about what ACT isn't, right? But ACT does call us to be mindful of our emotions. And for me, that's a very centering practice. That's very much getting in touch with myself. And so there is those moments where I'm called to sit in uncomfortable emotions, and then also to act in accordance with my values. And so I love that it's both getting in the feelings and also has a practical solution to offer. Um, and also, Cassie, you're the one who, first introduced me to this therapy. So I'm learning it from you. So what has made you love ACT as a clinician?
Yeah, so I fell in love with ACT, really the first presentation I heard on it, because it spoke to me in a way that, a lot of this is the way that I've coped throughout my life with different challenges, and I just haven't had a name for it. And so really at the core of my philosophy that fits with ACT is this idea of living in the present moment, being mindful of really what's going on right now, especially, when things in the future might be distracting us. I specifically use it, when I'm trying to fall asleep and I might be anxious about the thing that is coming up the next day. I remind myself, but there's nothing I can do about it right now. And
Mm.
that's really kind of one of the core things of ACT is living in the present moment, recognizing what we can do right now and what we can't do right now, and being okay with that. And this other piece of learning to take ourselves a little less seriously, right? Kind of enjoying life for what it is, and recognizing that our thoughts and our mind, it's going to tell us things that we don't always want to hear, and it's uh, how much value we put in that. That is going to be what we get out of it, right? So if my mind is telling me you're a terrible podcaster, right? That's not a helpful thought for me right now. I can just say, oh yeah, my mind is trying to just distract me from what I'm doing. But I don't have to buy into it. I don't have to listen to it. I can just say, that's just noise in the background. And so those things specifically for me have been helpful throughout my life. And I really like that, I found ACT as this whole encompassing treatment modality that really picks up on a lot of these different things.
Yeah, I agree with you in the fact that ACT is wholeness. It has ways that it engages with all parts of the human and is really adaptable to whatever is valuable for that person, right? It's not telling you what is valuable, it's asking you to do that work and figuring out what that is, and then getting in the habit of asking yourself, is this action helpful? Is
Mm-hmm.
this thought helpful? And I think that makes it a really wonderful modality for all of life. I think there's this common misconception that you do therapy and then you're fixed and it's fine. And that's like not how it goes, right?
Right.
That's not what it is. Firstly, we're not broken. And secondly, these are skills that we're learning to implement our entire lives,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can be in counseling for anxiety. When you're done with counseling, that doesn't mean that anxiety is going to go away. We hope it means that you're able to cope with it a little
Right.
bit better. And I think that ACT does a wonderful job of providing lifespan skills so that once you're done with counseling, you can still come back to these principles.
Right. I love that. I tell people all the time, my job isn't to cure you. My job is almost to help you learn how to be your own therapist in a way,
Hmm.
to give you skills that you're going to be able to flexibly implement as challenges arise in our lives because challenges are always going to come. And
Hmm.
sometimes a challenge might come and you might say, okay, I need to go back to counseling because this one's just too much for me. But the hope is that eventually you can get to the point where you kind of know how to manage a lot of those with some of the skills that ACT brings.
Yeah, especially these mindfulness skills. I think that
Mhm.
as I have had my own mindfulness practice, new things about myself come up all the time. And it's like, oh, I guess I didn't realize that that was happening,
Mhm.
or that I kind of thought this, right? So every day my mindfulness practice is different. And I love mindfulness because you are allowed to have the thought, this is hard. I don't think this is working. This is stupid. I don't want to do this today, whatever it is. You're allowed to have all of those thoughts while you're sitting in mindfulness.
Yeah.
And you just notice that they're there. And that is a great way to approach a lot of ACT, right? Even if you have the thought, this is stupid, great, keep doing it,
Mhm.
right? Or, keep engaging with that thought, keep making room for it and letting it exist. Um, that has been huge for me because when I learn something new and it's hard for me, I tend to think, well, this is dumb,
Mhm.
because I'm not getting it, right? And it's not that at all. And I love that my mindfulness practice has allowed me to have that thought and not fail at mindfulness.
Right. Yeah. Our thoughts don't have to control us. They can
Totally.
just be that. They can just be thoughts. So Leah, as someone who recently read this book for the first time in its entirety, what would you hope our students would get out of reading this book along with us?
Oh, that's a great question. I hope that this book provides newness and freshness to maybe old problems,
Hmm.
right? And not old, I don't want to say problems because that kind of applies a negative connotation, but that this is maybe a new way to approach this. And I think even in the counseling world, there is a big movement, and it's an evidence based movement, to help us change our thoughts. And this ACT is not that. ACT is saying that our thoughts are simply thoughts, they're just words. And that's a really new approach. So, for clients who have had counseling in the past, they might have encountered that thinking. And I hope that this feels new to them. I hope this feels like hope to them,
Mhm.
that there is hope amidst this. And I think it's coming at a really good time when we're home and just learning, learning how to do this. Even I got an email today from UT that our classes are going to be online this summer. So, that's a new thing that we have to be flexible with, right?
Mhm.
So I'm hoping that this helps our students to be flexible with their situation and to find hope.
Yeah, I love that. I think when I think of flexibility too, the term resiliency comes to my mind.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of my biggest hopes for us doing this podcast, us providing this book for students, is that students find a little more resiliency in themselves, a little bit more of an ability to go with the flow in, like you said, these times where we're in a global pandemic, we're under quarantine, we can't really go anywhere. And a lot of our daily lives are disrupted and we're having to do new things that we've never done before. We're having to change modalities in the ways that we do things that we've done. And I think, ACT can really lend its hand in this time and beyond this time as we continue in our lives, just to promote resiliency in students.
I love that. I think resiliency is such a good word for what we need to do right now and what we are doing right now. So I love that. Ditto what Kathy said. Um, so Kathy, where are we going in our next episode?
Yeah,
Where are we headed?
Yeah, so next week we are going to review chapters 4 through 14 of The Happiness Trap. We're going to talk a little bit about how we can relate to our thoughts in a different way in a term that is called diffusion. It is an ACT term, and we'll go through some different strategies of how can we kind of implement this thing called diffusion, in order to, like we said, take our thoughts a little less seriously, take a little bit of power back from our thoughts so we can still do what matters to us.
Yeah, I think diffusion is one of those things that we're going to come back to again and again. It's not like you read this chapter and you just get it. It's something you truly do have to practice. And I have found it to be one of my foundational things to understand, to get ACT, and to understand what to do with it. So I'm really excited to talk about that next time.
Yeah, me too. We hope that everyone will join us next week and the following weeks as we continue to work through this book. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. We will see you next week.
All right. Bye.